Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In First Chronicles chapter 12, we have a long list of mighty people, mighty men, warriors who came to David at Hebron to make him king over the house of Saul. And it goes through in quite detail to show how many soldiers came from which tribes. And I believe this would have been very important and significant and perhaps written for the exiles who were primarily from the tribe of Judah. Remember, they were there in the southern nation of Judah. That's when Babylon came in and took over Jerusalem and took them away into exile. So as they're coming back, of course, most of them are from the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe of David. And going through this list would have impressed on their mind how unified the nation, that is both the southern part and the northern part, were during the rule of David, and how at one point even all the other tribes had supported David, and it would have given them a little bit of that history. But what we want to focus on for our devotion today is the last part of this section, where it says in verse 38, all these being men of war who could draw up in battle formation came to Hebron with a perfect heart to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one mind to make David king. As we think about our spiritual lives and we think about us as the church, this is very similar to what we have experienced and the attitude that we have had, or at least should have had, as we came to Christ. These people came to David in order to make him king, and that's what we have done as well spiritually, is we've come to Christ to make him king. And it ought to be that our whole lives are dedicated to, one, showing Christ as king over the whole world, as they wanted to show that David was king over all of Israel. But also included in that is to have a perfect heart to make Christ king of our hearts, king of our lives. And when we do that, we are basically acting in similitude to these people as well. We want to make Christ as king just as they wanted to make David king. But one important aspect of this is the fact that they were men of war. It says all these being men of war who could draw up in battle formation. And that's the type of people that we need to be. If we want to make Christ king, we got to be able to draw up in battle formation. Not in a physical way, not that we pick up guns and start, shooting people, but in the sense that we are a part of a spiritual battle that's going on. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 20, it says, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Makes you sound very similar to these men of war back in First Chronicles. But it continues on and says, put on the full armor of God so that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. And so we come to Christ with a perfect heart to make him king, but then at the same time we come to him with the ability to come into battle formation. And not because we are gifted in and of ourselves, but because we have on the full armor of God. And we recognize the fact that it's God's armor, not our armor. We are just to put it on. And when we are fully clothed and decked out with the armor of God, we're able to stand up against the schemes of the devil and are able to stand firm against his influences. And so we want to make Christ king. We're warriors. We're prepared for battle. But then we get to the next part of what they did, and it's also similar to what we experienced. As we pick up in verse 39, it says, they were there with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their kinsmen had prepared for them. Moreover, those who were near to them, even as far as Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali, brought food on donkeys, camels, mules, and on oxen, great quantities of flour cakes, fig cakes, and bunches of raisins, wine, oil, oxen, and sheep. So they had a full supply. Yes, they're there to make David king, Yes, they are there for the battle, but at the same time, they had the full supply of everything that they needed for life and for sustenance. And that's what we find as well. As we make Christ king of our lives, as we submit to him and have a perfect heart to make him king, and as we come with the full armor of God, ready to resist in the evil day against Satan and against his schemes, we find in Christ full supply, everything that we need for sustenance and for life. Matter of fact, in our reading today, we also have included in our New Testament reading, John chapter 6, where Jesus talks about the fact that whoever eats of him will live forever. And if we were doing a devotion on that, we go in more detail what that all entails. But the main idea is that Christ is the full supply. It's contrasted with the manna in the wilderness where they ate it and died. But those who feast on Christ will live forever. And he is our full sustenance, spiritual sustenance, that is. And so in Christ, we make him king. We're warriors ready to fight his battles. But he gives us full supply. Which leads to the very last thing that we read about in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, where it says, there was joy indeed in all Israel, or in Israel. So this all led to joy. And here the people had lots of joy because, they finally had settled on a good king, a king that they could follow, a king they could believe in, a king that they could trust. And that brought great joy. Whenever you have a leader in which everyone can get behind them, and it really just lifts up the whole nation in joy to find something like that. And that's what they found in David. And so they readily gave up their lives for him, ready to fight the battles for him. They were fully supplied in him, and that produced joy. And that's exactly what we have in Christ. As we make him the king, when life's no longer about us and we don't live for our own selfish motives and desires, and we're living for him, and we're fighting his battles. And as we're fighting his battles, we just keep seeing him supply us with more and more sustenance and more life. It produces joy in our hearts, and we live out our days in joy before him. Even though the situations might be difficult and hard, and the trials and temptations may be great, we have joy because we know that we're doing all this for the king, and he's worthy of our allegiance. So these are some things to think about as you're doing your reading today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.